the San Fernando Valley. And I'm sure like many of you, we got our history in the 4th grade, and that was pretty much it when it came to the history of this area. So, like so many folks, when I graduated from high school, I said, I want to go where the history is. And so I began migrating west. There's no history here in Los Angeles, of course, so I'm going to go where the history is. And I ended up in New York. And when I came back, after 14 years in New York, I began to rediscover my city, and my jaw dropped when I found out how much history is here and how important Southern California and Los Angeles area are to the history of the United States and the world. And one day, I came across this book. This was probably in the early 80s, by a man named Charles Outland. And it was a book called Man-Made Disaster. And I read this book, and I was reading, and I almost read it in one sitting in bed. And I finished it, and I turned to my wife and partner, Nancy. I said, this is going to be a great story, and we got to do something with this. And I handed it to her, and she sort of flipped through it and put it aside. And the next night, she picked it up again, and after about 3 or 4 hours, said, are you going to turn the light out? She was as hooked as I was. And we began a long, long process that is culminating with, first of all, this book, and then you'll see excerpts from the documentary that I'm working on. So in any case, we'll start, and I'll be delighted to do this, and I'll show a little bit of the documentary, and then I'll be pleased to answer your questions. Can you all hear me well enough?
Yes.
What is it? Can you dim the lights?
Yeah, you can dim the lights a little bit, yeah. Well, we'll just go. It's the morning of March 13th, 1928. These are the remains of the 20-story high St. Francis Dam in San Francisco Canyon, 50 miles north of downtown Los Angeles and east of today's Santa Clarita. What you see is evidence of a devastating flood path that ended in the Pacific Ocean 54 miles away. 12.4 billion gallons of water roared west, killing more than 400 people and causing tens of millions of dollars of damage. The sudden collapse of the St. Francis Dam has been called the worst civil engineering failure of 20th century America. Yet you won't find it in any history of the United States. In my new book, Floodpath, I set out to change that. The story I tell combines long neglected and misunderstood social and political history, dramatic first-person accounts of death and survival, and a technological detective story, ending with an intense courtroom drama. It was a disaster with a long fuse, extending for miles and taking years to detonate. The plot line of Floodpath is driven by William Mulholland, the man whose Owens River Aqueduct brought the water that made the LA we know today possible. The tragedy began in San Francisco Canyon, also ended his legendary career in disgrace. For much of LA's early history, the land around the city was a treeless expanse, looking like this 19th century photo of the northern San Fernando Valley. The green strip in the upper part of the image is around the San Fernando Mission. This is what Bill Mulholland, a 22-year-old Irish immigrant seaman, saw in 1877 when he passed through on his way to the City of the Angels. Here's Los Angeles around 1880, a short time after Mulholland's inauspicious arrival. Starting as a ditch digger, the ambitious Irish immigrant became a mostly self-taught hydraulic engineer, reading books in the town's only public library. Even before this library, there's only one. And working for LA's privately owned water company. When the private water operation was purchased by the city in 1903, trusted, respected, no-nonsense 48-year-old Bill Mulholland was put in charge. He would spend the rest of his life working to provide Los Angeles with the water it needed to survive and grow. As LA's population boomed in the 1880s and 90s, it was clear the city needed a water supply beyond the Los Angeles River. Working together, engineer J.B. Lippincott on the left, engineer and former mayor Fred Eaton in the middle, and William Mulholland on the right, hatched an audacious scheme. They would tap the snowpack of the eastern Sierra in the Owens Valley, more than 200 miles away, with an aqueduct, the longest ever attempted. Topographical surveys showed gravity alone could carry the flow, avoiding the need for expensive pumping systems. At first, only a few city leaders and insider businessmen were let in on the deal. Land and water rights needed to be purchased, and Los Angeles wanted to prevent Owens Valley residents from finding out and jacking up the price. When the first rush of water arrived in the San Fernando Valley on November 5th, 1913, LA had a man-made river and was poised to become a major American city. Back in the Owens Valley, the Watterson brothers, Mark and Wilfred, local bankers and businessmen, weren't willing to accept LA's self-serving vision of the future. They declared a water war that lasts to this day. When legal strategies proved slow and unsatisfactory, the Wattersons and their allies adopted more direct means. On April 3rd, 1926, a dynamite blast ripped a gash in the aqueduct near the town of Lone Pine. 9 more attacks followed in the months leading to the summer of 1927. Mulholland by now had the nickname Aqueduct D-U-C-K Bill. And the bombers and their allies said this was an example of shooting the duck. William Mulholland, as you can see from this picture, wasn't easily intimidated. Even before the first dynamite attack, he devised a strategy to safeguard and expand the city's water supply. The full length of the original Owens River Aqueduct is 233 miles. While this liquid lifeline could be threatened by dynamiters, it also paralleled and crossed the treacherous San Andreas earthquake fault. As early as 1923, Mulholland envisioned a series of dams and reservoirs closer to Los Angeles, south of the Owens Valley and the San Andreas. One of the largest was the concrete arch St. Francis Dam in San Francisco Canyon. Construction began in the summer of 1924. Although the St. Francis Reservoir was meant for water storage, a new electrical power plant was included in the project. 1.5 miles below the dam, falling flow from the Owens River would drive 2 generators. Combined with an existing power plant above the reservoir, the twin generating stations could supply 90% of LA's electrical power. While the St. Francis Dam was rising in San Francisco Canyon, Owens Valley dynamiters continued their attacks. In May 1926, an anonymous phone call message threatened that the newly completed St. Francis Dam was next on the bombers' hit list. For a while, armed guards were stationed at the dam site, and at night, searchlights scanned the canyon. Full-time St. Francis dam keeper Tony Harnischweger was on extra alert. Tony had once served as a guard on the aqueduct, keeping an eye out for dynamiters in the Owens Valley. On the morning of March 12th, Harnischweger thought he saw a muddy leak coming from the area circled in this photograph. A muddy leak could mean the foundation of the St. Francis Dam was dissolving. He immediately telephoned his bosses in Los Angeles. When Mulholland and his assistant, Harvey Van Norman, arrived to investigate, to them, the leaking water appeared clear. It looked like it became muddy when mixed with construction debris. Mulholland and Van Norman concluded the dam's foundation was safe and left for Los Angeles. What happened next transforms a social, political, and engineering history into a drama of life and death. Just shortly before midnight, less than 12 hours after William Mulholland's inspection tour, the 208-foot tall St. Francis Dam collapsed catastrophically. It took less than an hour to empty 12.4 billion gallons of water. But in the chaos of confusion and down power and telephone lines, it was after 1 a.m. before the first warnings attempted to outrace the enormous torrent roaring toward thousands of people asleep downstream. 32-year-old Louise Guype was a widow from Texas who found a job as a night telephone operator in Santa Paula. Despite downed and undependable phone lines, she and other women in communities along the Santa Clara River Valley desperately attempted to pass on the news, staying at their posts, not knowing when and if they would be swept away by the flood. Answering an early morning call from Louise Guype, Santa Paula patrolman Thornton Edwards was rousted from bed. Racing through the streets on his motorcycle, headlight piercing the night and siren blaring, Edwards' exploits earned him the nickname the Paul Revere of the St. Francis flood. Warnings never arrived for 145 Southern California Edison workers camped near the banks of the Santa Clara River. Their wrecked automobiles were twisted evidence of the destructive power of the flood. In Floodpath, you'll read how Edison camp survivors tell stories of frantic efforts to escape from tents, only to be swept into a giant whirlpool filled with mud, rocks, torn apart homes and bridges, and mangled corpses. 13-year-old Thelma McCauley was in bed with measles when the Bardesdale house she lived in started to move. Her parents and brother were uncertain what to do, but the determined teenager declared she was going to get out through the back door, and did. Thelma never saw her family again. By dawn on March 13th, the St. Francis Dam floodpath had traveled from the depths of San Francisco Canyon, surging 54 miles through the heart of the Santa Clara River Valley, ending on the debris-strewn beach between Oxnard and Ventura. By then, all that remained of the St. Francis Dam was a single center section of concrete. Newspaper reporters dubbed it the Tombstone. Mulholland rushed to witness what was left of the dam he built in San Francisco Canyon. Joined by his assistant Harvey Van Norman, the 72-year-old chief looked on in stunned silence. For the younger of you in this audience, Van Norman is not looking at his iPhone.
What is he looking at?
A little notepad.
Did Mulholland at that time think he'd been sabotaged because of the other?
Please, listen, the story isn't over.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
That's the good part.
At Powerhouse 2, downstream from the dam, nothing remained except the shells of 2 battered generators. The powerhouse and home of 67 city employees and their families had been wiped off the canyon floor. There were only 3 survivors: Ray Rising, Lillian Curtis, and her 6-year-old son, Danny. Farther downstream, the impact of the St. Francis flood devastated as it killed. The torrent ripped apart this steel and concrete bridge in Castaic, and other structures were effortlessly crushed. In Santa Paula, Main Street was on high ground, but the Isabel School and surrounding neighborhood were inundated. A desperate early morning search for survivors more often resulted in the discovery of more dead bodies. Today, because of the slick shroud of mud, a final casualty count remains uncertain. The most accurate number is well over 400, including victims identified, unidentified, and reported missing. But it should be noted There are many people traveling through Southern California, and they all weren't wealthy people. This is even before the Depression. There were people, guys known as bindle stiffs, or hobos, and where they liked to camp was under bridges. And we know stories of some of these encampments who were worn, but we may not know the stories of many others. Names we'll know about, lost to their families, who were gone. Many of the hardest hit families were Mexican-American farm and orchard workers. The poorest lived in the Santa Clara riverbed, right in the heart of the flood path. 6 days after the disaster, 14 unidentified Mexican-American victims were mourned in a dramatic funeral in downtown Santa Paula. As Floodpath explores the personal tragedies of the St. Francis flood, it exposes 1920s American attitudes about race, ethnicity, and immigration, along with revealing contemporary social and political attitudes and values that have unexpected relevance to today's multicultural demographics. One of my favorite stories, well, I'll tell you later in the questions. In the weeks that followed the deluge, a rush of investigations was announced. Here, investigators visit the site of the St. Francis of the Floodpath as it becomes a technological detective story and a dramatic courtroom drama. With emotional testimony, bitter attacks, a staunch defense, and surprise witnesses, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Inquest was the inquiry most closely watched by the general public of Los Angeles and across America. It could lead to an indictment for murder against William Mulholland. To solve the mystery of the St. Francis Dam, the coroner's jury and a panel convened by the state of California, as well as at least 8 other investigations, needed to determine what really happened and who or what was responsible. Theories included an act of God, like an earthquake, something related to canyon geology, faulty design, or most sinister of all, sabotage, a dynamite attack, like those that had repeatedly blown apart sections of the Owens River aqueduct. Even if the collapse of Mulholland's Dam turned out to be an act of God or unfortunate accident, forensic engineers treated San Francisco Canyon like a crime scene, a CSI in 1928, gathering physical clues, evaluating evidence, considering causes, and possible culprits. As an example of clues, scour marks left above the location of Powerhouse 2, seen here after reconstruction began, indicate the height of the floodwaters, measured at a maximum of 140 feet. Do these marks have more detail about what caused the collapse? Even more dramatic and mysterious were huge clues scattered downstream, enormous fragments of the dam. This is the largest piece, left more than a mile away. It was estimated to weigh as much as 10,000 tons. How did it travel so far? Like reassembling a jigsaw puzzle, investigators carefully located and measured the flat fragments of the St. Francis Dam. Because of the structure's curved stair-step design, individual pieces or blocks could be relocated on a drawing of the concrete barrier when it was intact. Understanding how and why these fragments fell could help create a scenario for the failure of the St. Francis Dam. One of the most important and controversial sources of investigative evidence came from the Stevens gauge, the device that recorded the height of the reservoir tracked over time. This chart appears to show a slow decline in water level in the days and hours before the collapse, and then a precipitous drop around midnight on March 12th. As it turned out, as straightforward as it appeared, the information captured by the Stevens gauge suggested a surprising twist to understanding what was happening in the final minutes of the St. Francis Dam. William Mulholland was the central witness during the coroner's inquest. Devastated by the tragedy, he steadfastly testified that the St. Francis Dam was safe. Mulholland may have harbored hidden suspicions of a dynamite attack, but in the end, he accepted full blame for what happened. "I envy the dead," he said. Other engineers, less convinced about the safety of the St. Francis Dam, focused on the uncertain landscape of San Francisco Canyon. One witness brought a sample of a rock formation that supported the west side of the dam. When he dropped it into a glass of water, the rock dissolved into a blood-red slurry. It was a perfect moment for newspaper reporters, but the role of geology and the failure proved to be far more surprising and complex. When the verdict of the coroner's inquest was announced, along with the results of other prestigious panels, despite evidence of the possibility of an earthquake or dynamite, the consensus was responsibility for the failure lay with the work of the Los Angeles Bureau of Waterworks and Supply, now the DWP, and the judgments of William Mulholland. Although most reports were prepared quickly and often drew from shared evidence, few in the engineering community and general public questioned the results. In fact, there was a lot more to learn. On May 10th, 1929, the last standing reminder of the disaster, the tombstone, was blown to bits by dynamite. The remains were buried in a road paved over the gravesite. A new era of dam construction was about to transform the United States, and especially the American West, including Hoover Dam, which was struggling against opposition in the U.S. Congress. There was no need to talk more about a dam that had failed in San Francisco Canyon. Adding to this was the Mulholland Dam and Reservoir, another DWP project looming over downtown Hollywood. When it was learned that the concrete barrier in the Hollywood Hills was a virtual duplicate of the St. Francis Dam, which lay in ruins 50 miles away, there were angry accusations, and hundreds of thousands of lives were at risk. A flurry of safety investigations and redesigns were rushed to completion to assure that Los Angeles wasn't about to face another disaster. These included keeping the reservoir permanently at half level or below, and a visually comforting earthen berm planted with trees and shrubs. It wasn't long, like most of the face of Mulholland Dam, the story of the St. Francis Dam disaster disappeared from the pages of history books. But as you'll read in Floodpath, just as it seems the story is over, there's a plot twist in the appearance of an unexpected character who refused to forget. As a Santa Paula teenager, Charles Outland witnessed the aftermath of the flood. He grew up to become a Santa Clara River farmer and rancher and an enthusiastic local historian. Like William Mulholland, Outland was proud of his self-education and tough-minded determination. He was not a tenured history professor or trained civil engineer, but his obsessive and painstaking research uncovered long-ignored or overlooked aspects of the tragedy, which made more than a few uncomfortable. But Outland's persistent research, published by a regional press, attracted mostly local interest. It wasn't long before the light of historical awareness flickered and dimmed again, and another 30 years of obscurity followed. It even long ignored and overlooked, like a persistent ghost, the legacy of death and destruction in San Francisco Canyon resisted a final fade-out. There were surprises ahead. Only relatively recently, computer analysis, applied by civil engineer J. David Rogers and others, has provided the most detailed technical evaluation of the catastrophe. In Floodpath, you will follow the failure step by step and relive what happened just short of midnight on March 12, 1928. I believe rescuing the memory of the St. Francis Dam disaster is important for a fuller understanding of the sometimes hidden history of Los Angeles, but just as vital for today's world of climate change, limited water resources, and the challenges of an ignored American infrastructure. A recent study by the American Society of Civil Engineers gave the condition of dams in the United States a grade of D+. More than 4,400 were judged susceptible to failure, and barely more than half of high-hazard dams had an emergency action plan. After nearly 90 years, revived memories of the St. Francis Dam disaster offer warnings as well as lessons. This is the site of the St. Francis Dam today, viewed from the east side of San Francisco Canyon. Rubble is visible along the crest of the opposite ridgeline, looking like an ancient fortress. For years, there have been efforts to honor the ruins as a National Historic Site. People like Alan Pollock and the Historical Society, of which you are all members and benefiting from, have pushed hard for that to happen. Hasn't happened yet, but I hope this book, it needs a memorial and informative signage. I hope Floodpath helps hasten this process, reminding us of the hundreds who lost their lives, and as it provides timely context and information from the past as we face critical decisions about the future. Aside from that, I just think it's a hell of a story. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer your questions. And before I do that, I would like to give you a sneak preview, hopefully it'll work, of the documentary I've been working on for a number of years, which features the only interviews with eyewitness and survivors. We did interviews with nearly 20 of them, all of whom are no longer with us. So you'll get a glimpse of what this documentary will be, and you'll actually see some reminders of what I told you in the stories they tell.
You can't take that road anymore.
Valley Road you can't, but you can go up above. We can talk about that. You can hike it, but you can't drive. Stand by, it's going to be really good. If it doesn't work, I'll describe it shot by shot. What's that? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, we're going to get some questions while we're waiting, because I'm also a little concerned the sound will not be working properly, so we may have to start this again. So you got a question? Yes.
Is the Van Norman Dam still in use?
Yes, of course. Upper and lower. You
What was
pass
the
it.
question?
Oh, I should have. Is the Van Norman Dam still in use?
Yes.
And the answer is yes.
I understood there's a cemetery, actually a cemetery close by somewhere.
In the canyon, there is a cemetery, private cemetery, the Reese family has, and then along the canyon, there are public cemeteries. Many of the bodies in those cemeteries are unmarked. The names are not known. Yes?
If they had taken that leak seriously and thought there was a problem, could they have prevented this? Or was it just a losing battle anyways?
That's one of the questions of debate. That was asked of Mulholland. That if he really thought it was a problem, what would he have done? His answer was, I would of course warned everybody, and they said, well, gee, why didn't you just begin to lower the water behind the dam? And he said that lowering it with all the gates open, which had flooded the canyon, would have lowered the dam a foot a day. That's 12 billion gallons, 180 plus height of the water. So there wasn't anything immediate to do short of evacuating the entire valley. Here we go.
My father went up to the dam sides, and I remember at dinner the night when my father came home, he said to my mother, "The dam's gonna go." My dad, he was disturbed by the water he saw, and
he said, God, Dad, that's a lot of water shipping out of that wall. And my granddad said, oh, he said, that kind of leakage is typical of concrete dams.
Terrible commotions, a lot of noise. The sirens were blowing. Then we got a call. Somebody at the door warning everybody to move up to higher ground because the dam had broken.
At first she thought it was the wind. And she, that isn't the wind. And she said, the dam must have broken.
The water being over 80 feet tall, destroying everything in its path, including lives.
They decided we'd better get out of the house. It started moving. I told my mother, I said, Mother, I'm going to get out. And she said, oh, you foolish child, you can't. I said, I'm going to get out. And out I went, out the door. And that was the last I saw of any of them.
The water hit. The water hit, and everybody grabbed someone. We lost his nephew. He said he turned around suddenly he sees his little boy, his little chin up on a piece of wood, and his little hands like saying, here I am, here I am. But of course he was speaking Spanish, so he spoke Spanish. Here I am, Uncle. And my dad said that he felt like his life came back to him.
It was 9 miles downriver when the water receded, and I was left perched in a pile of debris. When the sun hit me, it was like I'd been asleep and had a bad dream.
There was a boy there that I'd gone to school with, and he tried to climb the tree, and it was all mud prints from his hands down the sides of the tree. Now, if we'd found him early that morning, we might have saved him, I don't know.
They found a body one time in sand. All that was sticking out were fingers. And when they dug it out, it was standing straight up and down. It was buried in silt that deep.
Newhall Holland at the inquest was reduced to a very small man. He took full blame.
He had done everything he thought was right. He'd experienced great success as an engineer. He didn't understand what went wrong. And that unanswered puzzle haunted him to his grave.
It was a major catastrophe, and of course through time all evidence of that had pretty well gone. But there were so many people lost and so many lives changed that I think it's important that it not be forgotten and wiped out.
History really needs to be told as it was, not the way people want it to have been.
Okay. Any more questions? The woman who gave up her seat here, if she's still here, it's back. I hate to make somebody go, yes.
Wasn't there, didn't a dam break somewhere down around the Baldwin Hills area?
Oh, yes.
Was that related at all?
It was only related in one way. There were two different kinds of dams, but an engineer, Manning Proctor, worked on both dams.
Wow.
It wasn't his fault. It was just because it was both there were DWP projects. One was an earthen dam, that was Baldwin Hills in '63. And when you read the book, and I don't want to give this away, there's an incredible coincidence connected to that collapse. It was not catastrophic. There was enough warning, and those of us like us were around in those days. Mm-hmm. KTLA, Channel 5, had its early helicopters up, and they were covering, and you could actually see the flood coming down La Cienega. Yes?
I have 3 things I wanted to mention quickly. One is, do you know Claire McWilliams? She's 105, lives locally, and remembers the day.
Oh, wow.
So if you'd like, we can find a way to introduce you to her.
Please.
The other is Do you know anything about the eucalyptus trees that we were told were planted along 126? And the third thing is, do you know that the Newhall Ranch plans to build an elementary school in the downstream area of 126? Those
First
are the
of all,
three.
please, and she remembers it well at 1 and 5? Wow.
I haven't seen her just recently. Have you seen her? I
Yeah,
think
she lives in
we know where she lives. It's just a question of, I think she
Okay,
can
well, please,
communicate. I think she
if
can
you
communicate.
come up,
fine.
get my card, you can take.
Sure.
The eucalyptus story, as far as I know, is a legend. I may be wrong, but I think it's a legend. And yes, I do know about, in fact, I'll tell you one of the great ironies, is that the development, which the Newhall Land and Farming Company, Farming Land Company is planning on building, which will be the largest in the history of California in this area. They were also the biggest receiver of restitution funds for property loss. They received more than almost $800,000 in 1928, a lot of money. It saved the company from bankruptcy. If it hadn't been for the St. Francis flood, there would be probably no Newhall Land and Farming Company, and possibly no development going on right now in this area. So it's one of the incredible, interesting connections that you come up with the story. Yes?
How far was the Indian trading post downstream?
Oh, Dan would know that. It was about 4 miles. Yeah.
That far?
Yeah, it was just before you leave the canyon.
And what about the myth or legend about the Indians leaving?
Yeah, that's in the book too. Have you read the book yet?
Yeah.
Oh, so you know that.
I knew it before, but.
Oh, okay.
Is it fact or fiction?
Well, you can take it as you wish. One of the things about a disaster like this is that, particularly a disaster in a really isolated area, is that the press come here, they don't know anything about anything. And they jump on the best story they can find, and one of the stories is that one of the things that the Cary Ranch trading post had were Navajos who came and they did crafts and they did performances for the tourists who were coming on the ridge route. The story is that they abruptly left because their medicine man had told them that the dam was going to collapse. Another story was, no, they hadn't left, and there were hundreds of Indians scouring the hills for their tribe members. And neither story was true. They actually had left. They were scheduled to leave long before. It was a regular schedule when they came and left. So maybe the medicine man had said something, but they were going to leave anyway. And as far as the hundreds of Indians scouring the hillsides, no, because they were back in Arizona at the time. Yes?
I want to be clear, was all the water behind that dam imported water?
Yeah, all came from the aqueduct.
It all came down.
Yeah. Yes?
I was wondering, one of the members of the water board was supposedly Reginaldo de Valle.
Yes, he was a
De
president.
Valle, of course, was
Yes.
Rancho Camulas near Peru, which
Yes.
we'll talk about tomorrow. Was there any kind of statements from him or about this aftermath, because it's so it didn't impact Camulas too much, it came close, but
Missed it, yeah.
did he have any kind of statements or?
No, he was the spokesperson for the Bureau of Waterworks and Supply. He was a prominent politician and a lawyer, came from a very distinguished family, a very good friend of Mulholland's. And one of the things you'll get into in this book is that how much the role of politics played in this battle, because Mulholland was caught in a three-way crossfire. There were the people in the Owens Valley, although the city had bought the water, they felt their water had been stolen from them because it was purchased without telling them what they're going to use the water for. They could have charged a lot more for it. They felt the water had been stolen. So they were shooting at Mulholland. On the other side was a very small but very active socialist, liberal socialist, left-wing part of the city who were angry at the fact that business had used their secret information to invest in real estate in the valley, and it made a fortune. On the right was free market enterprise people who didn't want to have any public-owned, city-owned. They think free enterprise should do everything. There should be no municipal water and power. So Mulholland is caught in this three-way crossfire. So the politics of pushing and shoving on each side, and so the importance of the St. Francis Dam, as far as Hoover Dam is concerned, that battle was going on right now. There were huge opponents in Congress who wanted to block Hoover Dam because they didn't think the government should be involved in building dams and reservoirs. It should be all private enterprise. They were willing to have the government give them the money, so they could profit from it, but they weren't going to let the government. So anyway, it ended up to be a compromise. But when this publicly owned dam in San Francisco Canyon failed just as the debate was heating up in Congress, that was the worst possible time. So one of the reasons why the dam is not so well known is a number of parties. People who were interested in developing the West with dams and reservoirs, engineers who believed that concrete dams were safe and were perfectly fine, politicians who were fighting against government projects like the dams that were being built, all used the St. Francis Dam as their weapon. Yes?
I have my hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, where was the Indian trading post?
It was north, just before the end of San Francisco Canyon when it opens up, and it's now a public park.
Tesoro Adobe.
Yeah, what's it called now?
The Tesoro.
Tesoro Adobe, yes.
Harry Carey.
Adobe Park.
Yeah, they just been what, less than 10 years. They just.
Well, what major intersection is it near?
We gotta wind up into the hills. I don't know. It's in the mountains. Still, there's development around it, but it's in the hills.
Copper Hill?
And McBean Parkway.
It's on Avenida Rancho Tesoro. So as you cross the bridge on the wash, you turn right.
Okay, well that's. I guess I could tell you, then you won't read the book, but. Can I play coy and not give you the final answer? Okay, well, I'll give you a debate, which still goes on. The general conclusion was the dam was built in a bad place for a dam. The geology of the canyon had what's called schist, which are these like slate on one side, and conglomerates like sandstone on the other.
Yeah.
Dams have been built in those conditions before, but not necessarily concrete dams and not exactly in the same way. So the argument to the end was the abutments had failed, either the west side or the east side. The early investigators said the west side, but further investigation said they were wrong. But it was geology. Yes?
What about the Van Norman Dam built with all his associates maybe?
Yes.
That was in the 71 earthquake?
Yes. It was threatened. It's an embankment. It's not a concrete dam. And yes, during the earthquake, there were some possibilities that they were concerned about it failing. There was a dam in Chatsworth, which also they determined for more than one reason. There was Rocketdyne was pouring stuff down into the water supply. Plus, the earthen dams were considered not so strong. So that same period, that dam. Yes, but that's true. It's still here, still working. You could drive by it every day. There are two of them. Yeah.
Two questions. One, if you go up San Francisco Canyon, is there a sign or signage or something that will tell you kind of where you're at? Or where is it compared to that pumping station that's there?
Well, you go after the pumping station, you wind up the side of the west. And there's a fairly open kind of on the south side of the street, a big dirt area where you can park your car. Everybody does park there. And you can hike down. Or, if you're into it, you can park at the power station and hike about 1.5 miles on the now abandoned road to get there. It's flat in the canyon.
Going up from the power station?
Yeah, going east.
Okay. And then the second question, I understand the aqueduct was originally gravity fed.
Yes.
Now there's the pumping stations and the pipes up there. Did they change the force of it, or why is it that we need to pump it now versus?
Good question. I don't know, Dan?
Really no pumping station.
There's no pumping station. I know. Yeah.
So it's still gravity fed?
Yeah. And that's one of the things that, again, is remarkable. You can think of it, all that distance, they had to keep it. And so it was a product challenge, yes.
Power plant, so water's going down the pipes into the power plant.
Yeah, there's penstocks, that's what drives the power plant. Those are they call power drives. And the canyon was so narrow, it was a good site for these because it was steep, and the aqueduct was like they could drop down and drive these turbines.
Gotcha, thanks.
Yes?
What's the main reason, in your opinion, that this is forgotten? It just seems that it's such a major tragedy.
I know, and I talk about this in the book. I have my own little hobby horse theory, which is that for most historians, there's a very East Coast point of view. If they talk about Los Angeles at all, it's talked about, if the West Coast is talked, or California's talked about, it's talked about the gold rush, the 1906 earthquake, and Hollywood coming to Los Angeles. And that's the history. There it is. And so for LA, if it's not associated with Hollywood, what history is there? There's no history here. That's one part. The other part is the fact that LA paid up pretty quick to everybody and repaired everything pretty quick. People wanted to get on because basically America is going to be transformed by a new era of dam building in the 30s and 40s, which it was. All the great dams were being built in that time. So engineers didn't want to do and Mulholland said, I did it, and so it was all kinds of excuses not to keep it up. And the fact was that whatever the excuses were, there were lessons to be learned. And they weren't necessarily engineering lessons. There were lessons about legal, what are the laws that should determine how a dam is built. And everybody sort of shared some of this because even today, when you say, oh, our infrastructure is collapsing, and people say, oh God, I don't know anything about infrastructure, I don't know anything about that. And no one cares. So we have these 4,400 dams susceptible to failure, and people don't know what to do. So one of the reasons I wrote this book is I wrote it for everyday folks to say, yeah, you can understand this stuff. And you should get involved in at least electing somebody who knows more than you do, who's going to be able to do this. Because we can't take the risk anymore. So one of the parts of the failure was that Mulholland had no supervision. He was the guy. No one could say to him, no, Bill, put it over here. And now you can't do that. The laws change. Yes?
So how many billions of gallons made there?
12.4.
And LA has done nothing but grow, and so is the valley.
Right.
What replaced that?
There was a dam in the 30s built in Bouquet Canyon, a reservoir dam. But basically, there was plenty of other dams around the area, and plus the aqueduct flow. So it was an issue, but it wasn't as if all the water and electricity stopped. It was amazing how quickly they repaired the aqueduct. I think the aqueduct was by November. The aqueduct's repaired, or even earlier than that. And the generators were running, in less than a year. But one of the points, again, which makes this a contemporary issue, is when we have water crisis as we do now with the drought. Los Angeles, the population of Los Angeles since 1970 has grown by 1 million. We use less water today than we did in 1970. And again, this is not technical. This is conservation measures, these are new laws, all this kind of stuff has nothing to do with figuring out how you design a dam or a reservoir. It's the public engaged in the priorities of saying, gee, we don't want to run out of water. And that's what I end the book discussing. Yes?
Well, I have a question then, because I had heard that Fred Eaton had a ranch up
Yes.
North, and that he was going to sell his land for like $1 million or something, and
Yes.
William Mulholland would not buy it, and so that's one of the reasons why
Sure.
St. Francis Dam was built where it was, and so Crowley Lake is now.
Where the land was, Long Valley.
Okay, is that correct?
It's in the book, when you read it, go.
Okay.
It's in the book, as they say. So just really quickly on that one. Fred Eaton was sort of the mentor he was slightly older, not a lot, but he had some little bit of education, and he was William Hall's mentor and friend. And he was the guy who was going to buy the land in the Owens Valley. His idea was, I'll be your partner, I'll be your public partner, I'll make a profit off of this, and the city will be able to do it as a private thing. But the federal government said, no, it's got to be public, no private, no private thing. So he kept a prime piece of property in this place called Long Valley, which is now called Lake. And the two old men just butted heads. And Mulholland, he wanted millions, and Mulholland said no. So when they wanted to go and to build, the first place he wanted to build, this is typical again of the politics and economics, it had nothing to do with construction of engineering. They wanted to put it in Tujunga Canyon, also very steep, good place. They announced it, and they went to the people that own the land, and they said, well, we want this land, we have $12,000. We'll buy your land. And they said, great, come up with 500,000, we'll talk. So Mulholland said, basically, screw you. My second choice is San Francisco Canyon. So I read one of the things, the wonderful ironies of the book. When Mulholland first came to Los Angeles with his brother on a horse, which they had bought in San Francisco, how did they get to Los Angeles? They went through San Francisco Canyon. The story's filled with these kinds of eerie things. Yeah, who hasn't asked a question?
I was wondering about the road that goes down through the debris field.
Yes.
When was that built and why was it closed?
Built in 29. It was closed, what, 5 or 6 years ago?
2005.
Yeah. There was a flood, which is often happens in San Francisco Canyon. There was a flood. And again, I talk about this in the book. And the road was torn up. But also, it's been discovered that there are 2 endangered species in the canyon. And so the feeling was that ultimately we'll just rip all the asphalt out, put it back to its natural state. And then they built the upper road where you, in fact, it's a better view, frankly, of the dam site. And you can hike back down if you want, but you can't take that road anymore. And ultimately, it will be, asphalt will be removed.
Why didn't Mulholland take the 5th? I mean, if it were today,
he couldn't and wouldn't.
An attorney would sit there and say, just keep your mouth shut.
That wasn't Bill Mulholland. He was like a general. He had lost a battle. He wasn't going to blame anybody. In fact, he said that. If this was a human failing, he said, I was that human. That's the kind of character he had. And that's what makes this a tragedy, because in fact, he did screw up. But he never tried to duck it. Never tried to duck it. Yes?
2 questions. One, did the flood path, how far into Santa Clarita proper did it come? And 2, the Castaic Dam, what is the flood path should something happen there?
That I don't know. As far as the extent it went, it didn't go to Newhall. It went to the edges of Saugus. In fact, that's where the flood really extended. And so the rescue operations, the ambulances, all ended up in Saugus. You know, by the Saugus Cafe, you see photographs in there. And then Castaic was pretty well hit where Magic Mountain is. And it all depends on the terrain of the canyon. It widened and narrowed, it widened and narrowed. And one of the stories you'll read about is when they got to Blue Cut, which is just on the Ventura side. It hit a little indentation that goes into the river, and when the water hit that, it bounced back and created this whirlpool, which I describe in the book. Yes?
I wanted to ask about the powerhouses, but Castaic Lake is about, I think it's 10 times as much water, and it would go straight down the Santa Clara River through Castaic. But my question on the powerhouses, powerhouse number 1 survived, or?
It was above the reservoir.
Okay, and powerhouse number 2 was rebuilt. There's a little village that's right around powerhouse number 1. Is that the original?
No, that was wiped off the map, but they rebuilt in the same area.
In powerhouse 1 or?
2. No, 1 was.
But powerhouse 1 has a village around it now. That's still the original, or is that?
I don't know. Portions of it, I expect would be.
The one by powerhouse 1 is original. Okay, but there's also one, now there's a stop sign when you go to the upper road, and there's a little DWP village there as well that has this 2-story, what you describe in your book as the clubhouse. So it looks like there was is that the village? That village was not the one that was wiped out, obviously.
No, it was wiped out. It was rebuilt. And then also
higher ground.
Yeah, and what was really cool, and Mulholland would have loved it. These 2 dynamos you saw, totally destroyed.
Right.
One of them wasn't totally destroyed, and they actually rebuilt it and put it back in service. And they then added 2 more, so now it's 3. So Mulholland would have loved that because he was into saving money. Yeah.
That's a cement arch dam, right?
Excuse me?
It was a cement arch dam.
Yes, but the arch, but it wasn't truly an arch dam, and that's what the fun part when you get into the analysis. You'll find that arch dams are really safety factors because if you know, you build an arch and the water pushes against the earth. It pushes the sides out against and makes it tighter against the abutments. But in the case of the St. Francis Dam, what should have been a safety factor turned out to be a contributing factor to the collapse.
But they didn't use any rebar in it.
You don't use rebar in those kinds of dams. They're called massive dams, the weight of the dam itself. And of course, part of the story is that if the dam is heavy enough, gravity, anchored firmly enough into the abutments, and planned properly so that the stresses are correct, you can get into this book, and it's not terrifying, actually. I think you all understand it. It's safe. You know, there are plenty of concrete dams that don't fall down. In this case, the unique circumstances of the geology plus the arch, which should have been a safety measure, turned out to be a contributing factor to the failure. But basically, it's just the weight. You don't put rebar in there. It's basically just the weight of the dam, and then the weight of the water also on the ground underneath it, basically, is and the sidewalls. It becomes a kind of a factor to keep it in place if the wedge is properly constructed. Yeah.
How much does your book touch on the subject of the Owens Valley water wars
Lots.
and the farmers whose lives were ruined?
Lots and lots
Okay,
of fun.
thank you.
And that's the first 2 or 3 chapters. When you read the book, one of the things that when you're a writer, you really have to write with a reader in mind. And when you're writing a book, you're playing a game with the reader. The reader's trying to figure out, why is he telling me this? And you're trying to say, oh, you should really know this, and I'm really, over here is what I really want to tell you. So you play this game. So when you look at the cover of the book, you knew nothing, right? There's a big thing. Hey, this dam must have collapsed. I bet a lot of people died. So there's no suspense in that story. So what do? The first chapter of the book, the dam fails and everybody's dead. The book hasn't even started yet. And then the reader says, my God, that's all these other pages. It's got to be something really interesting. You wouldn't stop the story there and hoping you get sucked into it. So that's the fun part of writing. I have one question in the back right now.
Just to paraphrase an article out of AV Press from Sunday, September 6th. Representative Steve Knight has legislation, and the article kind of bounces back and forth between President Obama's National Monument Plan, which is the train coming by, which is in San Bernardino, but Steve Knight's legislation, it says here, the legislation also would designate 440 acres as a national monument beside San Francisco Canyon Road, south of Green Valley, around the ruins of the St. Francis Dam, which collapsed in 1928 and killed hundreds of people.
Leading the charge in that.
So I would think that if you got in touch with Steve Knight's office to show a support behind that, and then also annually the Santa Clarita Valley Historical Society has a tour to the dam, which should be coming up next month. So just to make sure that that's addressed, if I haven't looked it up, but there's so much interest in the room.
Alan is the president of the
So, you know, just I didn't know if you had.
You know, the answer is not me writing those letters. Everyone in this room should write those letters.
Since you brought it up, I actually was going to mention it.
All right.
Yes, we do have legislation in Congress right now, and let me just give you a little background on that. A few years ago, I took a trip out to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and on that trip I visited Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which was the site of the worst dam disaster in American history. In that dam failure, which was in 1889, they lost about 2,200 people. And when I came home, I started reading about that dam failure, having known about our dam failure here. And there were so many similarities to me between these two dam failures. There was intrigue, like the Owens Valley Water Wars, they had a bunch of intrigue about their dam. Both dams were very faulty in their construction. There was massive destruction of property and loss of life in both dam failures. And some of the people asked, why was our dam failure forgotten? And John went into that. But realized that this was a huge national story in 1928. There were huge headlines all over the country, all over the world. This was not a little story. And yet, because of the politics of the time, in the 88 years ensuing, it was totally forgotten. And in the 88 years, there's really been not much effort to make any kind of memorialization at the site of the dam failure. There was a little attempt to put a plaque there, which lasted about a week, I think, in the 70s. And that's about it. And right now, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, that dam site is a national memorial. They have a National Park Service Visitor Center with museum, documentary film, and National Park Service rangers. It's the whole 9 yards. And what do we have here? Nothing. So that gave me the idea that why don't we try to get a national memorial here for the St. Francis Dam site. And I've been working over the last few years to drum up support for that. And thankfully, Representative Buck McKeon had introduced the bill, which he did at the end of a session, so they had to reintroduce, and that's where Congressman Steve Knight has come in. There is a bill now in Congress. proposing to make the site of the St. Francis Dam a national memorial. It's currently sitting in the House Natural Resources Committee, and they're currently negotiating to try to get it out of that committee to the floor of the House for a vote. And we're hoping that might happen in the next few months, so stay tuned. But remember, Congress is Congress right now, and God knows
It does
what
help
happens.
to get in touch with Steve Knight and write letters?
It would absolutely. We've been gathering letters for the last couple of years, and we still could use that support.
And that is separate from Obama's national monument.
Obama's national monument is the San Gabriel's national
That's
monument.
separate.
That is a separate issue.
Because the article was it went back and forth between the two, and it wasn't clear. I just wanted to make sure I did read it
The
right.
point really is that, the point I try to make in the book is, despite all the engineering problems, all the failures involved, this was also a societal failure in Los Angeles. And that we need to all feel that in little bits we shared in the collapse of the St. Francis Dam. And so when things like this come up, where this memorial, everyone in this room, no matter what your politics are, would vote for this memorial. And you need to get your expression out and write those letters and encourage people. But I did write the book in many ways to encourage what Alan is doing.
And just so you know, the reason Obama had to name that a national monument was because he has the executive power to do that, and it's because Congress would not act on, they wanted to make a national recreation area out of the San Gabriel Mountains. And that is because Congress would not act. That's why Obama just did it on his own and made that a national monument. Well, we're trying to get this thing through Congress the right way, because we really want to have it a legitimate national memorial that we can then, get the visitor center and everything that should be there to educate, to put that on the map and educate everybody and have a legacy there for the future.
You have a question?
Yeah, just a reminder to you, when we were looking at the pictures of all the people that died, you said you had a story to say that you wanted to talk about afterwards?
You said you had a favorite story.
Yeah, favorite story, something like that.
The fate of the aging historian. Oh! I was talking about survivors?
Yeah, it was one of the pictures with kids that looked like they had been hurt during the disaster, and you said that you had like a favorite story there.
Well, my favorite story is Thelma Macaulay, the 13-year-old girl.
Right.
That was, and interviewing her in her 70s, and it was still very vivid with her. Gee, lots of favorite stories, I'm sorry.
That was your favorite one to forget.
The little boy with William Hart.
Well, that's a great story too. One of the things about again that I wanted to do in this book, there's a number of things that I wanted to do. Support Alan in his efforts to get this monument done, but also, in a very basic level, to honor and remember those who died. And one of the things you find when there's Ann Stansel, who's a wonderful graduate student at CSUN, has itemized it, come up with a complete list of everybody and where they're buried, and how many people are buried in unmarked graves. So this is something that we need to also talk about the human costs of a disaster like this. It's not just a technical story. And the other thing that I really, I know, it's not connected to what you said, but I also, what I wanted to do was, what fascinates me as an historian, most people think of history, they say, oh, it's history, there it is, it's sort of on this tablet, and that's the story. What you don't understand is that history is an ongoing narrative. And decisions are made along the way, they have to be. You can't tell everything that happened in the last 200 years, you got to discard this and include this. And so people say, okay, that's not important, leave that out, that's important, let's make that big, this we can skip. And it really depends on a lot of things, but one of the things it depends upon is how the country changes in the present. And one of the things I wanted to do in this book is that for most of American history, and even the history of the West, Latino history is irrelevant. I mean, they came from Mexico, they worked in, it was sort of like, black history was they were slaves, and there were a lot of good athletes and musicians, and that's pretty much their story. Well, as the demographics of this country and city is changing, Latinos are becoming a larger part of the population, more economic, political. Suddenly, people have to realize there was a big history there. And I know the story I was going to tell you. There was a big history there, and this needs to be folded into the narrative too. And so that's what's happening right now. Not just, the St. Francis story is an example of that. There are many, many Mexican farm workers spoke Spanish. They came because of the revolution, many of them, from Mexico. They replaced Asian workers, Japanese mainly, who were working in the orchards. And they just didn't fit in the narrative. The narrative is determined from the East Coast point of view. And slowly, as California and the West becomes more important recognized, this book is one of my things is to say, there's not only history here, but it's influential and important history. Los Angeles, maybe not as old as Boston or New York or Philadelphia, but when you're talking about the 21st century and the centuries to come, Los Angeles is a major important historical component of the 20th and 21st century history. So, more and more now people are saying, oh, but we didn't, whoever thought about interviewing Mexican American survivors? Well, we did. I'm not Spanish speaking. I found a student who spoke Spanish. And we interviewed in Spanish. People who'd never been asked. They went through the same experiences that Thelma Macaulay went through. And then I also found Spanish language newspapers. Quite different perspective on what they were reporting. So in the past, historians said, well, that's irrelevant. They were just farm workers. Well, now those farm workers are, they may have caused and resulted in an election of an African-American president. And people will argue, and may determine the next election. So these farm workers, quote unquote, are more than that. And now their history needs to be incorporated. The story that I have, which is, it's a story of how, again, how history changes and the insights you get from history. One of the survivors was a Japanese American who owned an orchard near Bardsdale, Fillmore. And he was the leftover of when Asians did most of the picking and packing in the valley. And when the flood came, he'd been there since 1900 and had a sizable orchard. When the flood came, he took his orchard out. And so LA had rushed ahead to say, tell us what it's worth, here's a check. They were not totally giving away the money, but they were eager to get it behind them. And when it came to paying him, they looked up the law and they said, when did you buy this? And he said, whatever, 1900. And since then, the California Alien Land Law had been passed, which meant that Asians could not own property in California. So there was no way for him to buy back his own land. So here's another aspect of this story, how laws and in fact, believe it or not, that law and aspects of it lasted until the 1960s.
Is it in the book?
So that's in the book. It's in the book. And I would tell you the story in more detail, but I can't pronounce his last name. Yes?
My understanding is that the dam was originally supposed to be lower, and then they added 20 or 40 feet.
Yes.
And that is one of the problems. It
Yes.
wasn't designed to be as large as it was.
Yeah, what happened was that this is again typical of the connections between things that are non-technical. 1920s was the huge boom period for Los Angeles. That's really when the modern city we know really started, 1920s. And this city grew faster than any city, maybe in history in America. It's certainly the fastest, one of the fastest. And Mohawk was always racing against this. So when the population began to go even faster than anyone ever did, he decided to raise the height of the dam by 10 feet first, which allows for more water in the reservoir. And almost as soon as he did that, they thought again, and they said, oh, we better go up another 10 feet. So what you see is called the wing dike. That's essentially this extension, this 20-foot extension, which allows the original dam to be 20 feet higher. And as you read in the book, you will read the book, right? That has some very interesting design and safety elements to it, based on the structure of how a dam is supposed to be built, the proportions of the dam. It was not necessarily the configuring factor of it, but it's again this relationship between social pressures and engineering.
Is there any way of seeing the end of, I've been up that road a few times and I've heard 2.5, 3 miles, and I've tried to look for where, just looking at the area going, wow, I wonder how far back this dam actually went. And to go down the, yeah.
The reservoir's about, what, 3.5 miles?
You go up the road and you see that there's one, I don't want to call it a house, but it looks like a dwelling there. And just to look at the configuration, there's nothing that seems to be high enough to say, yes, this is definitely where the back end ended.
Well, I could bring the last picture. Well, there's the last picture. You can see. This is what, when you go, this is on, see that, there's a road on the other side. See that white thing that looks like a teeth marks? That's the remains of the wing dike. So there's the gap. See that fell off? That's where the wing, I don't know a pointer, but you can see the kind of reddish thing? That's where the abutment was on the west side. The reddish stuff is in fact red conglomerate. That was what everyone thought was the cause. On the other side, which you can't really see, is where the schist was, and that was the east abutment. But if you look from that upper road, very prominent, and you hike down in here and you go into the underbrush opposite that, you'll start finding pieces of the dam. And as you walk farther down the canyon, you'll find that huge piece that I had a picture of. You can stand next to it, you see the steps.
But what I'm saying is where the water actually was contained.
Okay, we're on the other side. The water was on this side.
Yeah, the north part, where, to go up San Francisco into Green Valley and say, wow, I wonder how far back this water went.
3.5 miles.
3.5.
Right.
So if I clock 3.5 miles up that road, I can look and I go, wow, this is how far back.
That was where the water was
This is
contained.
where the water started.
That's where it was contained.
Okay.
Well, one interesting kind of political observation on that wing dike, you notice now that it's in ruins. If you look at pictures just after the dam broke, that thing was totally intact.
Yeah.
Now, why do you think it's in ruins now?
After so many years of rain and erosion?
No, they actually hammered it down. That was part of the effort to make it blend into the scenery so that it wasn't so obvious.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is the morgue area that was here in Newhall, is the building still
I don't think so.
standing?
It was a cafe. I don't know the name of it. I can't remember the name of it. But one of the wonderful ironies of the story is that there was a makeshift morgue. There wasn't enough room for the bodies in any of the morgues, so they had a makeshift morgue. And the night before, they had a big party, and it was festooned with stuff. And there was a big sign outside the morgue saying, "Welcome."
I had something interesting you guys might be interested in. I worked at Powerhouse 2 for many, many years, just retired not too long ago, but I was going to tell you when you're talking about the 2 generators. In 1974, I was at Powerhouse 2 working, and a 74-year-old man came up to me, into the power plant, and he said he was one of the 4 that worked the midnight shift at Power Plant 1. Now, PP1 is 7 miles above where the dam was. And what he told me, he says, I was on shift at midnight on that date, and he says, I was one of the 4 operators. They had telephone communications, they had lost contact with PP2, Power Plant 2. And so he was one of the 4 guys. They took the upper road, and they went towards where the dam was. And when he came over the edge, we could see where the 2 generators were. Both of them were glowing red. They were still spinning.
Yeah.
And I tape recorded that, try to find that tape, but it was an old guy. I didn't know if you might have talked to this fellow or not.
No, there's a guy named Ray Sylvie and a guy named Tate were the 2 men on that night.
Okay.
A guy named Keeley did an interview, which I use extensively in the book. He describes that spinning, and he said it was bright cherry red. He said.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find that cassette, but I put a tape on it. So would you mind telling me what happened? But he did say that it's very black.
It's
He
probably
looked down
Keeley.
the canyon, and these 2, the way these things work, they hadn't shut the water off. And I worked for many years. They have valves up in the canyon up above there. So he was going to be shutting those valves off, but the thing was just spinning
Right,
very
steam
red.
was coming out.
Yeah, and that was interesting.
Yeah, it's in the book. It's in the book. Anybody else that hasn't asked a question? Yes.
Your book is largest disaster in 20th century.
Loss of life. Also, St. Francis. Well, depends what you say. Titanic hit an iceberg. Johnstown flood was caused by torrential rainstorm. San Francisco was an earthquake. None of those things happened. There was no torrential rainstorm. There was no natural cause, immediate cause of it. So that, I mean, you can be semantic about it and argue, but that's the reason I did it. And there's nothing compared to the loss of life that was not caused by a sort of natural disaster. Oh, yeah.
Isn't there a tour of the site
Yes.
coming up?
Coming up soon. Coming up on the 12th. Yes. Yes, she asked the question about landslides. And on the east abutment, you know your stuff. Part of the thing, again, this rush, when the state government came in, the governor from the state brought in this very prestigious panel. And they were the best guys, and they were going to determine what happened. How long do you think they studied the dam site before issuing their report?
Not very long.
A week. 6 days. They came and took a look around, and you know, they didn't. I mean, they had gathered information. It wasn't totally, but this is pretty quick. And they looked at what was the obvious, seemingly the obvious, was this soft red conglomerate that everybody had dropped in water and all that. They said, "Yep, that's it," and wrote up the report. Well, today we don't believe that anymore. We believe that it was the other side that went first. The dams collapsed almost simultaneously, but the initiation was on the east side. And it was caused, ironically, by what they call paleo landslides. And you'll read about that. These are repeated landslides that had happened in the valley over thousands, if not maybe millions of years, but certainly thousands of years. And ironically, what made the St. Francis Dam site ideal for a dam was these repeated landslides that began to slowly close off that section of the canyon, making it a nice place to put a dam. And the modern engineers think today it was those landslides that contributed to the failure in the end.
Wasn't there some hydraulic gold mining
Yes.
done that also brought them?
Oh, no, not, but there was gold mining nearby, but it wasn't a contributing factor to it. There was, when you go toward the geology was sort of shifty all over the place there, but that was not a contributing to the collapse.
Could the dam have been built safely?
There's an argument that says that if it had been a rock-fill earth and embankment dam, it might still be there. That no one knows, but that's one thought. Most people think that a concrete dam would not have survived. It was just not suitable for that. Yeah.
Is your book for sale like at Amazon.com or
Absolutely.
nationwide?
Just do it right now. Get your phone. What? I think they may be gone by now.
Yeah, no, we have about, unfortunately, my book purchaser didn't believe me when I told her there was going to be 100 people instead of 20 people, and so she purchased 20 books. So we have 20. We are going to,
And I will sign them, but no fighting.
Yeah, if you're interested, we can take a pre-order for more books, and I can get them to John to sign also.
Yes, I'd be happy to. If you want to do that, leave your name, Al will get them. I will come over, we'll have lunch, and I'll sign the books and get them back to you. But you can't get them through Amazon.
Are you buying lunch?
He's buying lunch. Yes.
Well, as a kid growing up in the valley like you, I actually heard about Mulholland and San Francisco because we used to go neck on Mulholland Boulevard. But,
So did I, but that was so far away.
yeah, I know.
Maybe with each other.
But we didn't have Wikipedia, but we did have the movies. And I was wondering how much or how little was the movie Chinatown and the following of Jake's Way started.
We don't
Jack
talk
Nicholson.
about that.
Sure we do. It's in the book, and I talk about it. There's a chapter about that.
There is, okay.
And that's basically one of my hobby horses, as we say, that I like to ride, is that people really, film noir, LA noir, they're wonderful films, and that's history to them. There's certainly elements that are connected to historical fact in that, but not a lot. One of the things that first of all, Chinatown takes place in the 1930s. Everything you talked about historically took place in 1905. The character Hollis Mulray is really the guy who's supposed to be closer to Mulholland. And the John Huston character that everybody thinks is Mulholland is really more like Harry Chandler, but neither one of them are really. And so there were a number of huge, as you read about in the Owens Valley story. One of the things that is in the key plot, one of the great scenes in Chinatown, is when Jack Nicholson follows this rocky canyon. And in the middle of the night, this rush of water comes through. And what he discovers later is that secretly, the city is releasing water into the canyon to the ocean to make it appear as if the city needed water that it didn't need. So that was in fact one of the conspiracy theories in the 1920s. Well, in fact, that water could never have been released without Mulholland's knowledge or permission, and he would have never given. He is the most miserly guy in water. And secondly, yeah, we needed the water. We really did. We didn't have to drain any reservoirs. And anybody who lived in the city, again, you go back, because a lot of people came to LA and they came and they didn't know the history of the city. That's another problem with the history. Old timers remembered, like Mulholland and even before him, droughts have changed the course of Los Angeles history repeatedly. In the 1860s, we were this huge cattle empire. And cattle, we sold hides, and it was a big business, ranchos. There was this enormous drought. All the cattle died. The entire economy of Los Angeles collapsed. Then there were floods, which often come afterward. And the entire LA River was redirected, so it came out of the ocean in a different place. All of this because of water. So over the years, there have been droughts and there have been flooding. So old timers knew that. But if you just arrived in LA, from Ohio, and you didn't know, and no one ever told you. So it's possible people to believe. And of course, one of the great stories I tell in the book is they were against the aqueduct. There was a doctor, a woman named Ethel Leonard, who was opposed to the aqueduct, thought the whole thing was a scam. We didn't need this water, and even if we got it, it would never arrive here. It would evaporate before it got here. Not only that, if it did get here, it would be so contaminated that everybody would get typhoid, and the water would be undrinkable. Well, we're drinking it now. But that's how heated the debate was, and how many people said basically the reason why the aqueduct was built, we never needed that water. I'll give you one quick thing, is when the water arrived, I believe the size of Los Angeles in square miles was 43.5 square miles. When the water arrived, cities began to annex themselves to Los Angeles to get to the water supply. So by 1930, it was 435 square miles. I mean, the city just, and it's only because of the arrival of the water. Now, people complain, well, these real estate speculators made a fortune. Indeed, they did. But that wasn't the sole. And some people said, we didn't need the water. Well, we did need the water because the city grew so fast. We quickly, within 50 years, we had to build another aqueduct from the Owens Valley, paralleling the old one, because we had run out of, that wasn't giving us enough water. So it's been a constant thing, but people, you forget history, you don't know history, you can be fooled. So a lot of this, the great plot lines, and the wonderful story I tell in the first chapter, and I'm giving away some nice stuff. And they screened the film for the DWP. And as you know, the story is murder, corruption, incest. And so the story goes, they screened it for the DWP, and the lights came up, and one of the representatives of the DWP came up and said, "This is outrageous. There was never any incest." Any more? Yes?
I just was wondering about Rancho Camulo, somebody mentioned it. It always seems amazing to me that just upstream, the Edison camp was half wiped out. Then Blue Cut comes along, obviously, and it sort of changes the way it's going. But right downstream of Blue Cut is Rancho Camulo, so low in the floodplain, it's amazing.
Well, it's all the geology. I mean, the fun stuff when you start tracking it down is the rivers are sort of like it's alive. I mean, it's following the riverbed, and so when it gets wide, it slows down. I mean, when it speeds up, when it gets tight, so it's shifting and bouncing off the sidewalls of canyons as it goes down. So when people describe the sound, you'll get this in the book. One of the horrifying things, this happened at midnight. Everybody's asleep. Many of the victims didn't know there was a St. Francis Dam. They woke up to this rumbling. Their house began to shake. They described it as a train, or they described it as thunder. They didn't know what it was. They opened the door of their house. They faced a 140-foot wall of water that grabs them and throws them in. People had no idea what was happening. And There are tons of stories like this in the book about people like that who couldn't figure it out. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't even know there was a dam there. So you can imagine how frightening and terrified it was.
I just have to say, I'm so wonderful it made it.
What's that?
It's so wonderful that Rancho Cumulos made it
Of
through.
course, there were many places that we did not make it. Yes, Amy? One more, yeah. March 12th, 1929, 11:57:30, 1928. 11:57:30 is the official launch. Now, how do we know that, you're going to ask next? What? That's right. March 12th, 1928. And that, the official start is 11:57:30. Why would we know that? Power line went down. And those guys in the power plant, in power plant 1, and we described them, as they said, using technical language, they said they went down in a heap. Yes. Well, there are no more questions. Thank you all for coming. I'll need the wax signing books for those, and then please go to Alan and give him your name, and I will come and sign the books, and you can pick them up.